The champagne glass in my hand was still full. Not a single sip. Not all night. I stood by the hallway arch half-shadowed by a white peony garland, listening to my sister laugh in my father's favorite room. My room. The room I repainted 3 winters ago after his last surgery. The same room where I sat beside his oxygen tank at 3 a.m. holding his hand through another sleepless cough. Now, it was lit with golden bulbs strung like fairy lights over Instagram-perfect florals. And Carla, my younger sister in a white lace dress that wasn't quite a wedding gown, raised her glass to thank everyone for coming. She didn't thank me. She didn't even look at me. I wasn't a guest. I was an afterthought. When the house was handed to her after Dad died, she said, "You were never meant to have it. You just stayed because you had nowhere else to go." No one stopped her. Not even the lawyer who'd watched me bathe our father in silence. They called it fair. Said I had no legal claim. Said Carla deserved a start in life. But this wasn't a start. This was an erasure. A cleansing. Of me. And now I stood among her guests, her fiancé's coworkers, her bridal party, the aunt who once asked if I'd ever find someone before it's too late. No one saw the woman who gave up a job, a home, and years of her life. They just saw the sister who lingered too long. The house had forgotten me. Or maybe it was forced to. Until tonight. Until I reached into my purse, fingers brushing the cold plastic of the recorder. 6 months ago, I sat beside Dad's hospice bed. He was barely breathing. But he whispered, "You've kept this house alive longer than I ever could." And I'd recorded every word. Now I looked at Carla standing near the fireplace. She didn't know what I held. She didn't know what I'd found in his locked drawer. But she would. Tonight the room would hear my voice. And for once they would listen. Would you fight for your place or let them write you out? Where are you listening from? Has family ever pushed you out of your own story? Dad called it the old bones. That's how he referred to the house on Squirrel Hill, like it was a living thing. It creaked when you walked through the upstairs hallway in winter. It held heat in the summer like an old quilt. And it smelled like lemon pledge coffee and worn-out Sunday paper. I moved back into that house in November of 2019. My divorce had just finalized. No children, no alimony, just a box of kitchen tools and a car with bad brakes. I was 41. And I was back in my childhood bedroom. Dad was already slowing down. He had a tremor in his right hand and the stairs tired him out. So I took the master bedroom downstairs and let him have the den converted into a makeshift living space. Carla came home that Christmas. She arrived in a rental BMW, perfume trailing behind her like silk. "Joe, you look settled," she said, scanning me from shoes to shoulder. She just turned 33 and was working at some PR firm in Manhattan. Her nails were perfect. Mine were split from washing Dad's sheets by hand. She stayed 2 days. Then left behind a tin of cookies and a comment that stuck longer. "Don't let this place eat you alive." I didn't plan to stay long. Just until Dad got stronger. But strength with age is rarely a return, it's a slow letting go. In 2020 the world shut down. And Dad fell twice that spring. We spent his 75th birthday on the back porch. I made lemon cake from scratch and he smiled when I brought out the old record player. "This is the good stuff, Joanne," he said. "Music. Cake. A girl who remembers when I had hair." We laughed. But behind the smile his voice had gone thinner. And the bills had gotten thicker. I used my savings to pay for his prescriptions. I quit my per diem nursing job and took a part-time clinic shift closer to home. I grocery shopped once a week, meal prepped on Sundays, and kept an Excel sheet of his medications taped to the fridge. Every Tuesday I scrubbed the bathroom tiles. Every Thursday I wheeled the garbage bins out before sunrise, and every morning I waited for the sound of the kettle before checking that he was breathing. That became my rhythm. My life. He never said thank you. But he called me kiddo again, and once when I brought him tea at 2 a.m., he squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm not afraid when you're here." Carla didn't visit in 2021. She sent a text on Father's Day, "Tell Dad I'm pitching a campaign in LA, will call next week." The call never came. That winter Dad's coughing got worse. I moved a cot into the living room and started keeping a journal of his symptoms. Sometimes I slept sitting up beside his recliner. One night he woke confused, asked where Mom was. She'd been gone 10 years. "I miss her voice," he mumbled. "So do I said. He reached for my wrist. "You've always had her quiet strength." That line, I didn't write it in the journal, I just carried it inside. In February 2022, we had our last snowstorm together. The power flickered. We lit candles and wrapped ourselves in throws. He told me the history of the house again, how his grandfather built it with his bare hands after the war. How every stair creak was a memory. "Some people move on fast," he said, staring at the frosted window. "But this place holds the ones who stay." Carla showed up 3 days after he died. She came in like a realtor, walked through the house in boots that left salt stains on the hardwood, snapped a photo of the fireplace with her phone, nodded like a developer with plans. "Dad would want us both to benefit," she said, eyes sharp. I looked down at my chipped nail polish. My wrists ached from lifting his body with hospice. I said nothing. The funeral was small. COVID protocols, just me, Carla, 2 aunts, and some neighbors. She cried. I didn't. The will reading happened 2 weeks later. Dad left a few savings bonds. A watch. His old fishing gear. The house solely Carla's. Due to her need for stability and future planning, the lawyer read aloud. My name wasn't mentioned. I felt the floor tip. Like a soft earthquake that no one else noticed. I asked about Dad's original draft. He told me he was writing one. Said, "Don't worry, kiddo, you'll be taken care of." The lawyer blinked. That must have been a private conversation. Carla looked down, then met my eyes with a smile that didn't reach her cheeks. "You never belonged here, Joe. You just got stuck." That night I packed 3 bags. Left the rest. The house didn't say goodbye. But the smell of coffee grounds and lemon polish stayed on my coat for days. The apartment I moved into was barely furnished. A secondhand couch, a squeaky twin bed, and a folding chair I used as a nightstand. The kitchen smelled faintly of old onions, no matter how many times I cleaned it. Every sound echoed. It wasn't home. It was a place to disappear. I returned to nursing full-time. 12-hour shifts 4 days a week. Mostly geriatrics, ironic given the grief I was still choking on. I stopped speaking to Carla. She didn't reach out, except once. A white envelope in the mailbox. Her handwriting. Inside was a save the date. Carla Merritt and Logan Baxter, bridal shower celebration the 18th of March, Squirrel Hill residence, Squirrel Hill. Not Dad's house. Not our family home, just a residence. And I was invited. It wasn't kindness, it was presentation. A "look how civil we are" performance for her wedding crowd. I put the envelope away without responding. Let it sit under a stack of utility bills and drugstore receipts. Didn't even tell Lisa. But the house wouldn't leave me. One Sunday morning 3 weeks before the shower, I drove by, just to see. There were hydrangeas by the front steps. A new porch light. And the blinds I'd always left cracked open shut tight. It looked generic. Stripped. The next day, I ran into Ruby from across the street at the pharmacy. "Joanne," she said, touching my forearm gently. "I still miss seeing you on the porch." "How are you?" I gave the usual smile. "I'm good. Staying busy." She hesitated. "Did Carla ever tell you about the appraiser she brought in last fall?" I blinked. "Number. When?" "While your dad was still alive." Her voice dropped. "I only found out because he asked me who she was. Thought she was selling." Something cold settled in my chest. That night I called Lisa. "She had someone value the house before Dad died," I said, staring at the ceiling in the dark. "She was planning. Long before he passed." Lisa's voice was sharp. And he had no idea. He was too tired. Too trusting. Too proud to ask questions. I swallowed. And I was too busy keeping him alive to notice. The next morning, I pulled out an old shoebox of Dad's things I'd taken with me, just the sentimental bits. Birthday cards, faded photographs, an old radio manual in his handwriting, and a yellow notepad. The top page was torn, but on the next was a line in his familiar scrawl: "Joanne should stay in the house. She knows its soul." My throat tightened. No date, no signature. But I knew that handwriting. I held the page like it might dissolve. Carla's words rang again. "You never belonged here." But he thought I did. He knew. He just never finalized it. That week I started dreaming of the house, not the polished one with hydrangeas. The old one, with chipped paint, open windows, and the smell of fresh coffee from the kitchen. I'd wake up crying. The morning of the bridal shower, I didn't plan to go. I put on scrubs, tied my hair back, and made coffee. Then I saw the envelope again, its edges curled from time and avoidance. And I remembered the notepad. What if this was the only chance not to make a scene, but to reclaim the story? Lisa picked up on the second ring. "You're going," she said before I said anything. "You're not crashing it. You're attending. You were invited." "I don't want drama." "Then don't bring it. Just bring the truth." She drove me. We parked 2 blocks away. I wore navy slacks, a gray blouse, and flats, not because I wanted to blend in, but because I wanted to stand steady. Carla opened the door herself. Her dress was white with pearls along the neckline. Her smile was brittle. "You came," she said flatly. "I was invited," I replied. She stepped aside. The hallway smelled like peonies and vanilla candles. Not like Dad. Not like anything real. The crowd was mostly Logan-side, young women in floral skirts, men in pastel button-ups holding wine. Aunts, coworkers, high school friends Carla barely kept up with but needed for Instagram photos. I stood near the back. Watched. Waited. Carla clinked her glass near the fireplace. "I just want to say thank you all for being here," she said, glowing for the room. "I know this house means a lot. And I'm honored to build my next chapter here." I stepped forward. Just one step. And the room noticed. Not all at once, but like ripples in a pond. One face turned, then another. Then Carla. Her smile froze, her hand tightened around the glass. "I have something to say," I said calmly. Lisa reached into her purse and handed me the small recorder. I held it loosely. No threats. No shaking. Just truth. "Before you toast to this house," I said, "there's a voice you all should hear." I pressed play. Dad's voice crackled through the room. Tired. Slow. But clear. "Joanne. She kept this house alive. It belongs to her. Not just the walls, the soul." Gasps. Silence. Carla took a step forward, lips parted in protest. But I wasn't done. I reached into my jacket. Pulled out a printed scan of the notepad page. Notarized or not, he made his intentions known. Maybe not for court, but for conscience. I laid the paper on the coffee table. "This house didn't raise just one daughter," I said quietly. "It held both of us. But only one of us stayed long enough to remember where the light switches are." I turned. Walked toward the door. Lisa followed. No applause, no confrontation. Just the sound of Carla's glass being set down. And silence. 3 days of silence. No phone calls. No texts. Not even a passive-aggressive email from Carla. I thought there'd be backlash. But instead there was. Nothing. The kind of nothing that hums. Heavy. Suspicious. Lisa came by Tuesday night with lentil soup and half a bottle of red. "Dead quiet," she said, toeing off her shoes. "People are talking, but no one's confronting. That's not peace. That's prelude." We sat on my old couch, knees wrapped in a faded throw. I hadn't slept much. Replay after replay of Dad's voice filled my head. "You think I went too far?" I asked. Lisa took a long sip. "You didn't throw wine in her face. You didn't shout. You pressed play." On his words, "That's not revenge. That's restoration." Still, I couldn't shake the ache in my chest. The ache of having said it all. And still feeling like I'd lost. On Friday, Carla called. One ring, then another. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was clipped. Joanne, I don't know what you were trying to prove, but you've embarrassed yourself. And me. Dad never filed that document, you know that. And dragging his last words into a party unforgivable. I didn't reply. But later that night I got a text from an unknown number. He said it to me too. The week before he died. I stared. The only R I could think of was Ruby. I called her the next morning. I hope it was okay, she said, voice soft. I didn't want to intrude. But your dad, he told me. He said Joanne will keep this house standing longer than I will. It stuck with me. Tears came faster than I expected. Not because it changed anything legally, but because I needed anyone to say I wasn't imagining it. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you for remembering. That weekend, I returned to the shoebox. Sifting through Dad's notes again, more careful this time. In a folded envelope marked insurance, I found something strange, a photocopy of the original draft will. Unsigned. Unfiled. But my name was there, listed beside the house. Under it in pen. To be updated, Carla doesn't want it. I dropped the page. It felt like the floor had shifted again, but this time in my direction. Monday morning I called Annette Ford, Dad's longtime attorney. The same woman who'd read the final will. Who'd smiled tight-lipped as my name was skipped. Her receptionist put me on hold. Then back again. Miss Merritt, she said, voice polite but dry. I'm not at liberty to revisit closed probate matters. I'm not asking you to, I said evenly. I'm asking why Dad's earlier drafts weren't mentioned. Or why his handwritten notes were disregarded. A pause. I advise you to retain counsel if you wish to explore this. Her voice dropped into something cooler. Be advised your sister is considering legal action for defamation. I almost laughed. She'd have to prove what I said was false, I replied. Silence. Then good day, Miss Merritt. Click. The gloves were off. By Tuesday, Carla had posted a carefully curated photo of the bridal shower. White flowers. Gold cutlery. No mention of me. No hint of the confrontation. But beneath it in the comments. What a beautiful event. The house looks amazing. Your father would be so proud. Is that the house Joanne used to live in? And then... nothing. The comment thread stopped cold. People knew. And no one wanted to pick a side publicly. Which meant she wasn't in control anymore. Not fully. I didn't want the house back. Not really. Not now. Not with all that history scalded onto the walls. But I wanted something else. Not a possession. A truth. A correction of the narrative. Lisa called that night. There's someone I want you to talk to, she said, my cousin Nate. He's a probate attorney. Quiet. Sharp. Doesn't waste time. I met him at a coffee shop on Forbes Avenue. He wore a navy suit with scuffed loafers and ordered tea, not coffee. After I explained, he listened quietly, flipping through my folder of scans. This won't reopen the estate, he said. But it can be presented to the ethics board, especially if Annette knowingly omitted prior drafts. Can I sue? He raised an eyebrow. For emotional fraud, not likely. But if you want a public correction, this is the path. I stared into my lukewarm coffee. I don't want revenge, I murmured. I want air cleared. For him. For me. For the girl who scrubbed Dad's bathroom floor every Tuesday. He nodded. Then, we start with documentation. The rest of that week I collected everything. Emails from Carla. The voice recording. The notepad. Ruby's testimony. The date-stamped files on Dad's laptop I still had access to. Everything. I didn't tell Carla. Didn't respond to her texts. Didn't mention her name, but I was preparing. Because healing, I realized, doesn't always come quietly. Sometimes it starts with clarity. And clarity requires courage. I didn't cry the night I moved out. Not even when I closed the door behind me and heard the latch click. But 2 months later, I stood in the middle of my tiny kitchen, holding a cracked mug, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. The coffee had gone cold. I couldn't remember pouring it. All I could think was he promised. And I was erased anyway. I dropped the mug. It shattered on the tile. I didn't clean it up. That was the lowest point. Not the funeral, not the will, not even the bridal shower. It was that Tuesday morning barefoot in a kitchen I hadn't chosen, realizing I didn't know who I was without that house. Lisa came that night. She didn't knock. Just opened the door and said, "Tell me everything you haven't said out loud." So, I did. I told her about the notepad, the voice recorder, the shoebox, the page that said Carla didn't want the house before she changed her mind. I told her about Dad's voice in my head, how it haunted and comforted me. How I kept replaying that final conversation as if I could squeeze justice from a memory. Lisa held my hand across the chipped dining table. "I believe you," she said, "but you need to ask yourself something, Joe. Do you want closure or control?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't know yet. That week I pulled back from work. Took 2 vacation days. Turned off my phone. I walked. Through the neighborhood. Past the grocery store where Dad always asked for the good pickles. Past the bus stop where I used to wait for Carla when we were kids. She always ran late. I always waited. I sat on the bench for 20 minutes. No one came. That night I listened to the recording again. Not for proof. Just to hear his voice. He sounded tired. But kind. And certain. "You've kept this house alive longer than I ever could." He didn't say, "I want you to have it," but he didn't have to. It wasn't about walls or floors, it was about recognition. A truth no one else would say out loud. I opened my laptop. Typed out a letter, 3 paragraphs, firm, respectful. I sent it to Carla. "You don't have to acknowledge what I did. But you don't get to erase it either. We both know I carried that house. You chose to rewrite the ending. I chose to record the middle." No response. But the next morning her bridal website disappeared. The entire thing. Gone. Lisa called 2 hours later. She pulled it. Someone must have shared the video. "What video?" Lisa paused. "I didn't tell you. But James, my coworker, was filming the event for her socials. He caught everything. The mic. The moment. He didn't delete it." I froze. So people saw, enough people, no one saying anything directly. But she's feeling it. I didn't know how to feel. Relief, shame, victory. Mostly, still hollow. I didn't want her humiliated. I wanted her honest. That night a package arrived at my door. No note. Just a box wrapped in brown paper. Inside, a small framed photo. Dad in the backyard. Holding a garden hose, watering his roses, wearing his old flannel and smiling toward the kitchen window. I took a step back. It was the same photo that used to hang in the hallway. I'd forgotten it existed. The frame was scratched, but it was his face, unposed, real. I sat on the floor, frame in lap, and cried. Finally. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd carried. For 4 years. Alone. Without applause. Without thanks. The tears weren't angry. They were tired, and somewhere beneath them I felt something shift. Not resolution, but readiness. I didn't want the house anymore. I wanted air. Space. A story that wasn't bound to walls and silence. The first thing I did was go to the courthouse. It wasn't dramatic, no showdown. No high heels clicking down marble floors. Just me in jeans and a windbreaker, holding a manila folder and a notebook. I wanted answers. Not a lawsuit. Just the truth on paper. The clerk at the probate desk wore thick glasses and a cardigan with cat pins. She asked for the case number. I handed her a copy of the final will. She scanned it. Typed something. Then nodded toward a side terminal. There's a public viewer. You can pull anything on file from this index. I sat down, entered Dad's name, and scrolled. There it was. Filed 3 weeks before his death. Signed. witnessed, legal. But something caught my eye. A prior draft submitted months earlier than withdrawn. I clicked. It was the one with both our names. Equal shares. Evenly split, it had been there. Then retracted. I printed both versions. Marked the dates, circled the withdrawal. Someone had changed his mind for him. That night, I called Nate, the attorney Lisa referred. He picked up on the second ring. "You're sure it was withdrawn?" "Yes." "And he was in home hospice when the final was filed?" "Yes." Silence. "That gives us enough to request an inquiry," he said. "Not to overturn the will, but to question the process. Especially if Carla was involved in facilitating the change." I closed my eyes. "Do I want that?" "You want the truth," he said. "Sometimes the truth changes the record. Sometimes it just gives you peace." I breathed in. I want peace. But I want it to be real. 2 days later, we filed the formal request. It wasn't newsworthy. No headlines, just a line in a docket. Probate process reconsideration submitted by surviving daughter. But Carla noticed. She called the next morning. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, voice clipped. "We've both moved on." I said nothing. "You humiliated me in front of Logan's family. Now you want to drag Dad's name through mud." Still, I stayed silent. "You think this gets you the house back? It doesn't. You've already lost." I finally spoke. "I'm not trying to win Carla. I'm trying to clear the fog." Click. That was the last time we spoke. Until the envelope arrived. Thick. Cream-colored. Return address Annette Ford. Inside a letter. Stiff. Formal. "Per your request and due to the attached ethical concerns, I am voluntarily withdrawing from Merritt estate representation. No apology. Just retreat." Enclosed was a copy of an email. From Carla to Annette. 2 weeks before Dad's final will. "We need to ensure it's just me. He doesn't want conflict and Joanne's been pushing for equal rights. Let's finalize before he gets too confused." The date matched the hospice intake. Dad hadn't driven in months. He couldn't walk to the bathroom, but he'd somehow signed a legal will. My hands trembled. He didn't change his mind. She changed the narrative. And Annette went along with it. I forwarded the file to Nate. He responded within minutes. "This is more than enough for a state bar review. Still no lawsuit potential, but definite grounds for public correction." I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just clean air. That night, I made pasta. With mushrooms and garlic. The way Dad liked. I lit a candle. Not for grief. For grounding. I opened a new notebook. Wrote one sentence: he knew I stayed. And she knew she didn't. Then closed it. The next morning I walked by the house. No plans, just instinct. A white moving truck was parked out front. I froze. Boxes stacked on the porch. Logan carrying a lamp. Carla in a hoodie directing someone on her phone. She saw me. For a second, she didn't look like Carla. She looked like a woman unraveling. She didn't wave. I didn't stop. Just walked past steady and quiet. That evening I got an email from Logan. "Joanne, I don't know everything that happened. But I know you were there." She wasn't. And that matters more than you think. I stared at the screen, unsure if he meant it as a truce or a goodbye. Either way, it didn't matter. The house was emptying itself. On its own terms. Lisa came over that weekend. We sat on the fire escape with coffee. "She's moving out," I said. Lisa raised her brows. "For good, I think so. Are you?" "Okay with that." I watched the sun settle over the rooflines. "I don't want the house back," I said. "I just want to stop carrying it." She nodded. "That's healing. When you stop asking for what should have been and start building what still can be." I smiled. Not because I felt better, but because I finally felt real. What would you do if someone rewrote your story and you found the evidence they'd erased you? Would you confront, or simply let the truth surface on its own? The house went on the market 2 weeks later. Carla didn't announce it. She didn't post pictures. She didn't text. But I found the listing. There it was on Zillow. 4 bedrooms. 2.5 baths. Recently updated, rich with history, perfect for a growing family. I stared at the photos for 10 straight minutes. They'd repainted the kitchen, covered the old wallpaper in the stairwell, removed the cabinet where Dad used to store his prescription bottles. It looked polished, sanitized, a memory wiped clean. And yet one photo stopped me. The living room. Under the front window, just barely in frame, was Dad's old wooden record cabinet. Scratched, too low to be functional. Still there. Maybe she forgot. Maybe the stager thought it added character. Maybe it didn't matter, but I saw it, and I knew you can't stage away the truth. That night, I sat with Nate and Lisa at my dining table. Legal pads. A laptop. A folder marked inquiry. This is the moment, Nate said. Once the bar review begins, it becomes public record. Local press will catch it. You sure you want that? Lisa looked at me over her tea. It's not just about Carla anymore, Joe. This becomes legacy, not just justice. I nodded slowly. I don't want to destroy her. I want to end the story in the light. So we finalized the letter, submitted the complaint, attached all supporting documents. And then we waited. But I didn't stop there. There was one more thing I needed to do. Something Dad never had the chance to finish. Something no legal process could give me. I called Olivia, a local real estate agent I used to know through the hospital volunteer circuit. Mature, no nonsense, not interested in drama. I want to find something small, I told her. Something I can afford, not fancy. Just mine. She didn't ask why. Just got to work. In the meantime, I started writing again, not just notes in a journal, but the full story. Dad. The house. Carla. The erasure. The reclaiming. Lisa helped me shape it. She suggested publishing it anonymously on a local online platform. No names. No lawsuits. Just truth, she said, and other women need to hear it. I wasn't sure anyone would read it, but I sent it anyway. It went live on a Thursday. By Monday, it had 13,000 views. The comments were staggering. This is my sister and me, different town, same betrayal. My father left everything to my brother. I was the one who stayed. I cried reading this. Thank you for writing what I couldn't say out loud. I didn't feel famous. I felt less alone. And then came the email. Subject: correction request approved. The Pennsylvania Bar has reviewed the ethics complaint and confirms a formal correction will be attached to the case record regarding the Merritt estate. While the will remains legally valid, the record will reflect discrepancies and acknowledge procedural concerns during execution. I exhaled. No reversal, no lawsuit. But the truth stamped in the record. Carla wouldn't be removed. But the myth of a clean inheritance was gone. That weekend Olivia called. I found something, she said. It's not big, but it has bones. The place was 15 minutes away. 2 bedrooms, a porch, and a small fireplace just like the one Dad always wanted to fix. It needed work. The kitchen was dated, the yard overgrown. But it was mine, all mine. We signed papers within a month. On move-in day, Lisa brought me a plant. A little peace lily in a blue ceramic pot. For new chapters, she said, and rooms that don't remember who you used to be. We stood in my empty living room boxes, still taped, and let the silence settle. This wasn't the old house. This wasn't a replacement. It was a decision. To stop circling a locked door and build a new one. That night, I made pasta again. Same mushrooms. Same garlic. I lit a candle. Turned on Dad's old record player. Yes, I'd taken it before the movers cleared the house. Quietly. Without permission, the song was crackly imperfect. But it filled the room. And for the first time in years, I felt full. Not victorious, not vindicated, just whole. The next morning, I received a letter. From Carla. No return address, just my name. I saw the article. I saw what they wrote. I can't undo what I did. But I see it now. You carried him. You carried all of us. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope someday you remember the part of me that once waited at the bus stop with you. There were no threats. No excuses. Just those words. I sat at the window, morning light creeping across the floor. Coffee warm in my hands. And I didn't cry. I folded the letter. Placed it in a drawer. Not to revisit, but to remind myself. This isn't how it ends. It's how I begin. The hearing wasn't in a courtroom. It was in a small paneled room in the state board building, a long table, a pitcher of water, and 4 people with clipboards. No cameras, no reporters. Just policy protocol and my pulse beating in my ears. Nate sat beside me. His calm was steadying. He reminded me, "You're not here to fight, you're here to tell the truth." Carla wasn't present. Neither was Annette Ford. But their actions were on paper in evidence in the pause that followed every slide we presented. The voice recording, the timeline of hospice, the handwritten note, the email, the withdrawal and replacement of the will. I read my statement slowly. I'm not here to accuse. I'm here because I lived in that house with my father for 4 years through surgeries, falls, dementia spells, and silence. And when he died, my name wasn't just left out of a document, it was removed from my own story. This is not about inheritance. This is about integrity. There was silence afterward. But not the kind that says you've gone too far. It was the kind that lingers when people are still absorbing what can't be denied. The board promised a public summary. And they kept their word. 3 weeks later, the findings were released. In light of newly presented material, a formal statement has been attached to the Merritt probate file, noting procedural inconsistencies and ethical conflicts surrounding counsel behavior and beneficiary involvement. It wasn't front-page news, but it mattered. And it would follow Annette's record permanently. The same week, the house listing was quietly removed. Not sold, just withdrawn. The open house sign disappeared from the yard. No more peonies on the porch, no light in the living room window. I drove by once, just to see. The blinds were still shut. But something had shifted. It no longer looked like something I'd lost. It looked like something that had let go of me. That Saturday, I moved the last box into my new place. Lisa helped arrange the bookshelves. Nate brought takeout. Even Ruby stopped by holding a pie she didn't bake but insisted was from her heart. We sat on the floor eating lo mein and sipping cheap wine. Laughter came easily. The silence had changed. It wasn't the heavy kind. It was soft, a quiet earned. Later that night alone, I opened a drawer and pulled out the envelope Carla had sent. I read her words again. Still no apology, but recognition. And sometimes that's the only kind of justice you ever get. Someone saying, "I see it now." I wrote back, "I don't hate you, I hated being erased. I hated that you let it happen and watched me drown in it. But now I'm learning to breathe again, and I hope someday you do too." I didn't send it. I placed it in the same drawer, folded, unmailed. But mine. 2 weeks later, I got a message request on Facebook. From a woman named Denise. A stranger. "Hi Joanne, I read your story. My father left everything to my brothers. I was the one who cared for him. I thought I was alone. Thank you for reminding me I'm not invisible." I stared at her words heart tight, then typed back, "You're not. We remember. Even if no one else does." The comments on my article kept growing. Quiet stories. Women over 40. Women with calloused hands and aching backs. They'd carried parents, carried siblings, carried whole families. And still been cut out. Cut off. Cut down. I read everyone. Sometimes in the dark, sometimes while stirring soup, sometimes with tears, sometimes with fury. But always with recognition. They were me. And I was them. Closure, I realize, doesn't come in a courtroom. It comes in the chorus. Of other voices. Other truths. Finally allowed to speak. That month I started something new. A group, Quiet Legacy. Online anonymous if needed. A space for daughters, sisters, caregivers to share, to grieve, to scream softly into a room where someone would finally hear them. The name came from Dad. From what he once told me, his voice cracking in the glow of the television light. You've got a quiet kind of strength, Joe. Not loud, not flashy. But it'll outlast everything. He was right. Not about the will, not about the law, but about me. I'd outlasted it, all of it. Spring didn't come all at once that year. It arrived in small kindnesses, the sound of birds before sunrise, the smell of soil waking up after months of cold. The kind of spring that doesn't announce itself but waits for you to notice. I noticed. One morning, standing at the kitchen sink in my new home, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, I realized the silence no longer hurt. It was just quiet. Not the kind of silence that follows betrayal. Not the sharp hush of being erased. This was something gentler. A stillness I had earned. The rose bushes I planted in March were finally blooming, small, stubborn, imperfect. But alive. I tended them like memory. No grand pruning, no perfect shape. Just water, sunlight, presence. Dad would have loved them. He used to say things that didn't bloom still had a purpose. That roots mattered more than flowers. I never understood that until now. Because now I knew my roots were not in the house I lost. They were in the parts of me that stayed when no one else did. A few weeks after the roses bloomed, I found an envelope tucked beneath the porch light. No stamp. No handwriting. Just my name. Inside was a photograph. Me in a pink sweatshirt, hair pulled back, laughing in the kitchen with a sponge in one hand and rubber gloves halfway off. Dad stood behind me, pretending to swoon dramatically, his face caught mid-smile. I hadn't seen that picture in years. I didn't even remember it being taken. But I knew who had. Carla. On the back in neat black ink, you were always the one who stayed. See, no apology. No return address. Just the truth folded and left in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't call her. Instead, I placed the photo in a simple frame and set it next to the peace lily Lisa gave me and the old wooden clock I'd rescued from the house before they changed the locks. Some things don't need forgiveness to be finished. Some stories don't need rewriting, they just need naming. That same month, I started a Saturday ritual. Nothing dramatic, just tea. Toast. Sometimes scrambled eggs if I had the energy. It began with 3 women. Lisa. Her coworker Dana, a neighbor named Rochelle. They had their own versions of my story. Different cities, different houses, different names. But the same ache. They gave everything and got nothing. So we gathered. At first to vent. Then to reflect. Then to begin. Quiet Legacy was born not from rage but from the need to remember ourselves. We didn't call it a support group, we called it a table. You showed up, you poured your tea, you shared or you didn't. We passed around old birthday cards that were never answered. Wills that omitted names. Photos with one sister cropped out. No one gasped. No one pitied. We just said, I know, I've been there. You still matter. By August, our stories had reached 5 cities. One woman flew in from Ohio with a duffel bag and 2 printed journals. Another brought a voicemail from her father's attorney telling her she was no longer relevant to estate matters. And yet there we were. Present. Breathing. Claiming the kind of legacy no one can leave in a will, not property, but presence, not titles, but truth. Sometimes I wonder what Dad would think now. Of the meetings. Of the stories. Of the women sitting around my worn wooden table reclaiming names that had been edited out of every version of the family album. I think he'd be quiet at first. But he'd listen. He always listened better in silence. And then he'd say what he always did. You don't need to prove anything, Joe. You just need to keep showing up. So I do. I still work 3 days a week at the clinic. Still stop by the farmer's market on Saturdays for fresh plums. Still drink coffee from the same chipped mug every morning while the house warms with light. But something's different now. The quiet isn't punishment, it's peace. The kind you choose, not the kind you survive. Carla never reached out again. Not directly. But sometimes I see her name pop up on a comment thread, on a shared article, on a quiet donation made to a caregiver's fund. It doesn't hurt anymore, because I don't need her to name me. I've already done that work myself. And the house, it sold. To a young couple with 2 kids and a golden retriever. They planted sunflowers by the front step. Painted the shutters navy blue. I drove by once just to see if the porch still creaked. It did. I smiled, then kept driving. That creak didn't belong to me anymore. And that's okay. Because legacy isn't always what you hold on to. Sometimes it's what you finally put down. Lisa asked me last week what I'd say now if I had to sum up everything. Not the pain. Not the facts. Just the lesson. I told her this: justice doesn't always feel like a win. Sometimes it just feels like breathing again. She nodded. And we sat there in the porch light, watching the roses bend gently in the wind, not perfect, but rooted. And blooming. There were nights I thought I'd never get here. Nights where the silence felt like a verdict and my reflection looked like someone who'd simply disappeared. The grief wasn't just about Dad. It wasn't even about the house. It was about being erased while still alive. Being told without words that everything you gave didn't count because it wasn't documented, notarized, or performed. I used to keep score in my head. Every dinner made. Every late-night drive to the pharmacy. Every time I skipped a haircut to pay for his inhaler. But eventually the scorekeeping wore me out. It kept me trapped in the very system I was trying to escape. Now I don't measure my worth by what I did. I measure it by how I stayed, and by how I finally left. Leaving doesn't always mean walking away. Sometimes it means standing in place long enough for the weight to shift off your shoulders, and when it does, you don't fly, you simply breathe. That's what this life is now. A long, slow, sacred breath. Unmeasured. Undismissed. Mine, and maybe that's enough. Have you ever reclaimed your story one truth at a time? Have you ever found closure not by fighting harder, but by letting go with grace? What part of your life needs a second telling? Share your story below. We're listening. You are not invisible, you are not alone, and you are still becoming. Subscribe to EN Reddit Story for more real stories of justice, healing, and empowerment after 40. Every ending can be a beginning. And every voice matters, especially yours.